Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is a collaborative experimental meetup with clearerthinking.org. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Spencer. Spencer, go ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you all for coming. Really great to have you here. This is our experimental first digital clear thinking meetup in collaboration with Shrikant and 52 Living Ideas. I definitely recommend checking out 52 Living Ideas if you want to have daily meetups about all kinds of interesting topics in psychology and philosophy and so forth. Today we're going to do our first meetup, and it's going to be on the topic of decision making. And I prepared a little presentation for you on what I think some of the most important decision making principles are. But we also want this to be interactive. So we're going to have an exercise we're going to ask you to do. We're going to have you're going to be in a small group at one point, doing an exercise with a group. We're also at the end, for those interested, purely optional, we're going to give you the ability to socialize with some of the other attendees. So hopefully this will be interesting, hopefully it'll be fun. Also want you to let you know we're recording. So if you don't want to be recorded, then I suggest not chiming in when you have an opportunity to do so. Shrikant is going to be moderating. Thank you so much for doing that, Shrikant. He's a pro moderator, so it's really great to have him here. I don't know if we have anyone else from the Clear Thinking team coming. I think they might be. Oh, shout out to Rob, who's one of my colleagues. Hi, Rob. Just seeing if there's anyone else from the team here. Okay, there's so many people here I can't even tell, to be honest. But anyway, hopefully we'll catch them later. If you're on the Clear Thinking team or the Sparkwave team, please just say so in the chat so we can locate you, because it's too hard to scroll through everyone. All right. We're also going to ask you, we really appreciate it if you fill out a feedback form at the end, because we really want to know how to make these events better. The purpose of these events is to really add benefit for you, and so your feedback will be just incredibly important for that. Oh, hi, Holly is here from the Clear Thinking team. Hey, Holly. Let's see, can we mute her for a second? Holly,
I'll
mute her.
Great to be here.
Yeah, so this is Holly from the Clear Thinking team. You probably, if you've ever used our website, clearthinking.org, you've probably seen some of her work before because she's been integral in making a bunch of our programs. So thanks for coming, Holly.
No problem.
Hi, Holly. Nice to meet you. I just want to remind everybody that we record only this main session, not the breakout rooms, okay? Or the socializing.
Yeah. Great. So let us get started. I'm just going to figure out how to screen share here, and we'll get going. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
I can't see my screen, and my whole screen just went dark. What's going on? Okay, here we go. Okay, you can see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So just to give you a lay of the land, I'm going to talk for a little while. Then we're going to do our first exercise where you're going to actually try to apply some of the things that I talked about. So I think it would really help if you actually take a moment right now to think about a decision in your life you're going to have to make in the future. So please take a moment to think about that decision now, because I want you to have it in mind during this presentation, and then we're going to have you do an exercise with that decision. If you can't think of any decision you have to make, then you could think about a hypothetical one or a past decision, but ideally there's some big decision in the future that you have to make, and you can keep that in mind. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to think about that now. All right, let's get going. So it may surprise you to learn that decision-making is very much like climbing mountains. And so I'm going to use that as a persistent metaphor today to talk about many of the things that people do wrong when they're making decisions, 9 common decision-making mistakes, and tie them each into a journey where you're trying to get to the top of a mountain. And I think that will help illustrate how these decision-making mistakes work and what to do about them. So let's get started. This beautiful mountain range. This is the kind of playing field you're working with. And there are all these goals you have on this mountain range, maybe to get that job you always wanted, or maybe to have a happy marriage, or to get a master's degree, or whatever it is. And the first mistake that I see happen really commonly with decision making is that you don't really know what you're trying to achieve with that decision, right? You're dealing with the details of the decision, but you haven't thought, what are the things that are at stake? How does this relate to the goals that I'm trying to work towards in my life? And there's a really simple solution to that, which is to keep your goals in sight when you're making your decisions. And this just matters an incredible amount because so much of how well our life goes depends on the decisions that we make, right? Whether we actually achieve our goals will hinge on the many decisions we make throughout our life. So that's why I think this topic is so important. That's why I wanted to do it for our first session today. Okay, so as you're going and trying to achieve all of the different goals in your life, whatever they are, occasionally you'll actually get to one of these goals and you realize it's really not what you thought. You'll get to the top of Mount Everest and realize it's covered in trash, which apparently, I think this is actually a photo from Mount Everest, if I'm not mistaken. But so sometimes you realize that the goals are not what you thought they were. And I just see this come up so often where, someone thinks about, oh, I want to be a lawyer. And then they end up a lawyer and they're like, actually, I don't really like this. This isn't, maybe this is great for some people, but this is actually not for me. My goal is not actually the valuable thing that I thought it was. And so this is mistake number 2, which is not aligning your goals with your values. So in other words, sometimes we set goals for ourselves and they're really not based on the fact that that goal will get us the thing that we truly value. And there's a really simple solution to this too, which is really trying to know your values and use them when you're setting your goals. And if you've never seen our Intrinsic Values program on clearthing.org, which Holly helped us make, I highly recommend checking this out. This is actually based on research we did on what are all the things that humans intrinsically value. That is, what are the things that we value as not as a means to an end, but as an end in and of itself, right? Something that you care about occurring, even if you get no other benefits from it. And so this maps out all the different intrinsic values that we've been able to find in our research, looking at what political scientists say about values, looking at what philosophers say, looking at what psychologists say, and so on. And also doing our own study where we had people submit, I think it was about 3,000 things that they said that they intrinsically valued. And so you can find this on our website, clearthing.org. And it's really, really valuable because without knowing what your values are, it's hard to set good goals. And so even if you achieve your goals, sometimes you realize, they're covered in trash. So, all right. The next really big issue I see in decision making is we get to a fork in the road and we think, oh, okay, I've got to make a decision. Well, I could go take the left path or I could take the right path. But very often, if we kind of zoom out, we realize there's actually another path that we just weren't even considering. Because this is called narrow framing. We're kind of too zoomed in on the situation and not realizing there are other options. And we actually created a tool for helping people make good life decisions, which is called the Decision Advisor tool. You can find it on our website. And one of the really fascinating things that happened when we were studying, running studies to develop this tool, is that for one of those studies, we actually gave people the suggestion that they should generate more options than the options they'd already considered. We just said, hey, people often don't consider enough options. We think you should generate more options. Do you want to do it? And then the other group in the study, we basically wouldn't let them proceed until they generate more options. We said, we know you've already come up with some options, but we're going to make you generate at least one more option. So here's the fascinating thing that happened. The first group they were given the choice whether they wanted to generate more options, none of them did it. 0 people did it. The second group where we said, okay, you have to generate more options in this decision. We're not going to let you move forward until you do. They all generated at least one more option. And 20% of them, by the end of the tool, actually decided that one of the new options they generated was better than all the other options. So I think a handy saying to keep in mind is that your choice cannot be better than the best option you considered, right? And very, very often we'll frame things as just, oh, it's a choice between A and B. It's like, do I quit my job or do I stay with my job? We often frame things that way. But in reality, there are usually a lot of other paths. For example, maybe you can renegotiate with your boss a different role for yourself, or change the parameters of your work, or maybe you could switch to part-time, or, there very often are just many more possibilities than we see in front of us. So this is the mistake of narrow framing. The solution is just to brainstorm more options. Try to come up with a bunch. And generally with brainstorming, I recommend not really evaluating during the brainstorming process. Just say, I'm going to sit down, come up with many possibilities I can, And only after you've generated them, now come back and compare them and say which ones actually seem promising and get rid of the ones that are bad. But if you're too critical during the brainstorming process, it can actually prevent the like free flow of ideas and actually getting a lot of ideas on the paper. Okay, so this is something that else that happens with decision making that's super common, which is that you're like, well, I'm on this path. What am I going to do? I'm just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other, right? I'm just going to keep moving forward. In other words, there doesn't even appear to be any decision to be made. But the reality is, you don't have to stay on the path, right? You could go off the path to the left, you could go off the path to the right. And this is true almost any point in our lives. Like we could, in theory, just go do something completely different than we're doing, than what we've been doing our whole lives, right? We could just fly to Thailand. We could just quit our job and change careers at any given moment. And you know, not to say that we should do those things usually, but one of the ways to improve our decision making is simply to notice more situations where decision making can occur, to not just put one foot in front of the other just because the path is in front of us, right? And so this is mistake number 4, which is you ignore problems in your life. You don't realize that there actually is a decision to be made there. You don't think about, oh, I'm actually not very happy in my relationship. I should be making a decision about this relationship. Or you just wait for opportunities. You're like, well, I'm walking on the path. I don't see any branches. I don't see any branching points or directions I could go. Well, sometimes you have to make an opportunity. Sometimes you have to go off the path a little bit to create a new opportunity. And we just have this incredible tendency to stick with the default. You know, if you think about trying to predict what someone's going to do tomorrow, a very, very, very good predictor of that is just what did they do yesterday, right? But it doesn't have to be the case, right? We can actually force new options to appear in front of us. So what's the solution? Just noticing the problems that you have and making active decisions about them. Not getting so used to them that you're no longer making a decision at all. Also searching for opportunities, which sometimes you have to make opportunities come to you. Sometimes they don't just appear in front of you. This is another one that comes up a lot where we're not really sure what to do about a decision, but it turns out there's some very quick and easy research that actually would give us a lot of information. I see this especially happening in career decisions, where people will be considering what do they want to do in their career, and they're making this decision based on some hypothetical imagined version of the career. Just to give you an example of this, one of my family members was thinking about becoming a biologist, and he really liked biology. And so what he did is he actually ended up getting an internship in a biology lab without any training. You know, he hadn't gone to study biology or anything. And what he discovered as an intern in the biology lab is that actually a lot of what biologists do, at least in that subfield, is working with chemicals, working with like agents, stuff like this, like literally, you know, test tubes, pipetting, and so on. And he realized that this idea of what a biologist was very different than like the day-to-day practice of what biology is. And he realized that, okay, that wasn't the career he wanted. You know, that might be a great career for some people, but it wasn't what he wanted to do. And I think so often we're trying to make decisions about things, and a little bit of research would actually give us vast amounts of information about what the different paths would be like. And so just keep that in mind, that, you know, this mistake of not doing enough research, really easy to overcome a lot of times. You could ask things like, what is that job really like? Well, I bet you can find blog posts written by people in that career who describe what is a day like in, you know, in the life of a biologist or whatever. You know, does that degree actually help me? Well, you can probably find statistics somewhere on how often people are hired with a degree versus not with a degree, and so on. So it's a very simple solution, just do your research. Okay, this leads to the next problem that I think is really common in decision making, is that there's so many people that might have been where we're going before, right? You know, we're trying to get a certain job, we're trying to get to a certain place in life, but there are all these people out there that have done that, right? And yet often we don't think to talk to those people. So this mistake is basically just not asking for advice from those who've been there before. And when I think about this, there are really two types of people I think about being the most critical to talk to in these situations. The first are people that we just think they're wise. We think they're good decision makers, and we can leverage their decision-making ability to try to make our decisions better. The second type of people are people that are experts or people with experience, and they actually have facts they can bring to bear on our decision-making. So we should ask wise people. We should ask those with experience what they think, but I'll add the important caveat here. We still should make the decision on our own. We should never let others make a decision for us, right? We have to make the decision, but we should go find what other people say about it, and they can give us insights and they can help steer us away from problems. Okay, this brings us to the next challenge with decision making. Imagine that you're trying to get across the mountain range and you decide to go through a tunnel, and you walk for hours and you suddenly realize that the tunnel is blocked, right? You're stuck in this cave, and the only way out is to go back hours and have all that wasted work. Now, it would be absolutely insane in this situation to be like, well, I spent hours getting here. I should just stay here, right? I should just stay in this underground cavern because I don't want to have to go all the way back 3 hours, right? That would be totally crazy. And yet, in our everyday lives, we often do things that are very much like this. So this is mistake number 7, which is that people don't avoid the sunk cost fallacy. Now, the sunk cost fallacy is essentially when we've invested a lot of time or effort or energy or money in one particular path, right? Maybe we've gone and got a degree in that path, or we've started a career down a path, or maybe we have a project or a startup we've spent tons of time working on. And the thing about those past investments of time, money, and resources is that they're already lost no matter what we do, right? It doesn't matter whether you keep doing the thing or not. You've already lost everything you've invested in the past. So the key thing with the sunk cost fallacy is when you're considering what to do now, you need to only think about the future. You need to not take into account those past expenditures because they're lost whether you continue down this path or not, right? So that's like the simple idea of the sunk cost fallacy. And we actually have a program on clearthink.org all about the sunk cost fallacy. If you want to check it out, it goes into much more depth. So solution number 7, consider only future prospects. Past investments of time, energy, effort, they're already lost, right? They really don't matter anymore because whether you continue with what you're doing, whether you abandon your startup or stick with it, all that money, time, effort you've invested is gone already. The next really common problem I see is that there'll be one path ahead of us that's kind of frightening or involves some kind of short-term pain or unpleasantness. And there's another path ahead of us that doesn't. Like there's no short-term pain, it's short-term, it's not scary. And there's a really strong temptation to not even really seriously consider the unpleasant path. But the reality is that the unpleasant path might be much better for us in the long term. So this is mistake number 8, choosing the safe, easy, or less scary choice over the right choice. If you want to think about a really good example of this, like think about going to the dentist, right? A lot of people hate going to the dentist. But if you just never go to the dentist, then your teeth might have serious problems and you might have way more pain in the long term. And so just in general, I think this is actually a source of many decision-making problems. It comes up in relationships where someone's unhappy in a relationship, but breaking up is so much short-term unpleasantness that they just stay together, because staying together in the short term is always better than breaking up, even though in the long term, it doesn't make any sense. So solution number 8, if you're a high anxiety person especially, it's absolutely critical to learn to push through fear. As someone who experiences anxiety myself, this is, I feel like, one of the biggest things that saved me in life is really building a habit of being, I'm afraid, but who cares? I can deal with being afraid. I can deal with anxiety. So if you're a high anxiety person and you don't learn to push through your anxiety, then what will happen is it will start enclosing your world, where there'll be fewer and fewer paths you can take because, oh, well, if I take that path, I can't deal with it. I'm going to be too anxious. If I take that path, can't deal with it. I'm going to be too anxious. Just as an example, when I first started running meetups, I used to be, this was many years ago, I used to be really nervous before the events. But fortunately, I just pushed through to the point where, now it, barely triggers my anxiety at all. And that's the nature of anxiety, is that the more you push through, generally the easier it becomes. That's the idea behind exposure therapy. If you are someone who experiences a lot of anxiety, I highly recommend learning about exposure therapy. And there's a wonderful book called When Panic Attacks that is all about that, which is really cool. We also actually make an app for people with anxiety called Mindease. So if you go to mindease.io, mindease.io, you can check out our app, which you can try out for free. Okay, more generally, how does this advice apply to people who don't have high anxiety? Well, basically, your ability to make good decisions really does depend on your willingness to endure short-term pain. Think about the dentist again. Like sometimes you're going to have to endure really bad short-term pain to get that longer-term benefit. So this is critical for everyone. Final mistake I see is that sometimes people just need to relax. Sometimes they just need to chill out. Sometimes they're overanalyzing, they're over-worrying about a decision. And the solution is actually to be less analytical or less intense about how you're making the decision. I mean, the reality of our lives is that most decisions are reversible. You know, we'll try one thing for a while, we won't like it, we'll do something else, we'll change our mind, and that's okay. You know, very rarely are people's lives this linear path where they're making all the right choices. And often it's good enough to be 80% confident that's the right path. You know, unless it's a really severely important decision, or unless it's totally irreversible. You know, 80% might be a good enough confidence level, and that's fine. And maybe you don't need to keep going. Once you're 80% confident, maybe that's sufficient, or you know, maybe in some cases 90% if it's even more important. So this is mistake number 9, thinking the decision is going to make or break your life, which is rarely true, and also falling for these biases called affective forecasting biases. Basically, the idea is that very often when we're thinking about a problem or an issue, we're overestimate how much long-term consequence it will have on our life or our happiness, right? You're thinking, you know, do the classic example of this. Imagine you've just broken up with your partner, right? Of course you feel miserable. A lot of people in those moments will think, oh, I'm never going to be happy again. I'm never going to find someone I love again. I'm always going to be miserable. And you know, on the outside, as that, if you're that person's friend, you know that's very unlikely to be true. You know that this person's just feeling bad. But we do a much more minor version of that very often, where we have a big decision we're making, and we think this is like will determine all of my future. You know, this will be, you know, in 5 years is going to determine you know, how good or bad my life is. But the reality is that's probably not true. So solution 9, keep in mind, most decisions are reversible. We'll have many opportunities. Our path is not going to be linear. Oftentimes, you know, 80 or 90% confident is plenty for many types of decisions in life. And your decisions are never going to be perfect. Just aim to be right, you know, often enough. So that's what I've got for you. And we're going to have you now do an exercise where you're going to apply some of these ideas. You're going to have to go into the chat window. Let me stop my screen sharing here. We're going to have to go into, you're going to have to go in the chat window. I'm about to put a document in there, which has this exercise. And for this first exercise, we're just going to ask you to do it alone because I think it's the most useful way for you to do it. But then for the second exercise, it's going to come a little later, you're actually going to do exercise in a small group. So let me just figure out how to put this document in here. Please find the chat window if you don't have it in front of you. There we go. I just put it in the chat window. Can you, Shrikant, did that come through?
Yes.
Oh, someone asked what the app name is. The app name is mindies.io. I'll put that in here as well if you want to, if the app we made for anxiety. Someone asked what the book name was again. The book is called When Panic Attacks. All right, so please download that document, decision-making exercise.pdf. And is it going to be 10 minutes, Shrikant? Does that sound right to you?
That's good.
So okay, we're gonna have you work on this exercise for 10 minutes. Please, I really highly recommend you actually do this exercise because it's one thing to hear a little presentation, but unless you start applying it, it just doesn't do anything for you, right? You have to turn the knowledge from like ideas into action. So please spend the next 10 minutes
Spencer,
working on this
people
exercise.
are having difficulty accessing the document. Is it a multi-page document? It's a very short document.
It's like 2 pages. Let me, you know what? I'm also going to give a link.
Yeah.
I'll give a link to it as
give
well.
a link. Link is better. Yeah.
Okay, I'll give a link as well, if in case you can't download it. Give me one moment. Okay, try this link here. I just put a link in that also goes to the document. If anyone has trouble accessing it, just say so in the chat and we'll figure out how to get it to you.
4 rules. Number 1, keep on topic. We're talking only about decision making and this particular exercise. Number 2, be brief. Number 3, be courteous. Feel free to disagree on anything, but be courteous. And number 4, in order to ask questions, just type an exclamation mark. So it's going to be Uri, followed by Joe, followed by Sagar, followed by Rebecca. Uri, go ahead. Just a second. I'm going to I'm going to give you the ability to unmute yourself. Hold on. Yes, Uri, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself and go ahead. All right, not Uri. So Joe, go ahead.
Hi, Spencer, Shrikant. Thank you for presenting today. I appreciate it. is there this inverse relationship between the difficulty of the decision and the options that you want? Like, in other words, you want fewer options for a very simplistic decision because it just helps you save your energy. But I look at it as where you have these big decisions, you want to brainstorm and have as many options as possible, because that comes back to the over analyzing part. So I just see this like kind of as a relationship where, for rule number one, where generate options, it's kind of like you want to limit your options in certain cases, because one of my goals was downsizing. So something along those lines, you kind of want to limit.
Absolutely, and that's a great question, and it's absolutely true. You have to think about what's at stake. In general, if there's very little at stake, then maybe you just need two options, and that's fine. Like, you're trying to decide what you're putting on your salad. If you have 100 options, maybe that's actually more frustrating. I mean, maybe you only want 20 options of what you can put on your salad, or maybe you only want 5, right? So yeah, absolutely. And when there's a really high stakes decision, that's when it's really important to sit down, spend the time, generate more options. Another thing about relevant to this is that I have a framework called the FIRE framework, which is about when you should just go with your gut versus when you should even use analysis at all, whether you should use reflection. And so if you're interested in that topic of like, when should I just make a fast gut decision and when should I use my reflection, I'll put a link in the chat to my video, which discusses the FIRE framework and how to do that. Good question, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Sagar, Amulya, Rebecca, Jim, and James. Please keep your questions brief. Sagar, go ahead. Just unmute yourself, ask your questions. Sagar. Okay, next up is Amulya.
Hello, thank you for organizing all of this. And my question has already been answered. Thank you. It was
Okay.
No problem, thanks.
All right, we're doing very well here in answering questions. Next one is Rebecca, Jim, James, and Katin. Rebecca or RBEC.
Hi. Well, I've always had problems making decisions throughout my life. And now it's a decision about buying a house, which I know I have to do for stability in my life. So as a single middle-aged, moderate income woman, I've had lots of opportunities and I've always tried to find a way to get out of them, even though. So
what's your question, Rebecca?
Fear.
We have very little time.
Okay, it's always the fear that gets in my way. So that's my problem, and also maybe not being aware of my what you called before the FIRE framework, your instincts. Like how can you trust your instincts?
Right. Yeah, so first of all, fear is one of the biggest reasons people make bad decisions. And my best advice, the single best advice I have for that is to get treatment for anxiety if you think that anxiety is really holding you back. My favorite set of techniques for treating anxiety is cognitive behavioral therapy. The reason it's my favorite is because I think it has the most evidence for treating anxiety. It doesn't mean it's the only thing that works. There are a lot of other things that might work, but I think it has the most evidence. Another set of techniques is mindfulness-based stress reduction. I also highly recommend that book I mentioned before, When Panic Attacks. So that's the first piece of advice I have for anyone who's struggling with anxiety. Get treatment. It's so valuable. It will make your life so much better potentially. But the second thing about, well, how do you know whether to trust your gut? So I'll just briefly tell you about how I think about that. We tend to be much better with gut decisions when either the primary aspect of the decision is understanding what we value, right? Like if you're making a decision about like whether you love someone or not, like, well, that's really a decision about your internal state and your values and your feelings. And there you have to listen to your gut because your gut has most of the information in it. If you're making a decision that's more like, oh, there's 3 things I could do and I'm not sure which is a good idea, you often cannot really trust your gut unless you've made that kind of decision in the past repeatedly. It's like, why is a chess master able to look at a chessboard and suddenly immediately pick out what the best move is? It's because they've made tens of thousands of played tens of thousands of chess games, right? And they've honed their intuition over time. But you can learn more about that on that link I provided on for the FIRE framework. Thanks for your question.
Next up is Sagar. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have put my question in the chat. So many times I have been confused while taking decisions, and how natural is it to take a right decision? We can follow those 8 strategies mentioned in the PDF, and still the decision may be wrong. We don't know what will happen. So there's this quote by Mr. Tata that I don't believe in taking right decisions. I take the decision, prove them right. How do you view this, and how can we do things in that way? Could you please enlighten on that?
Yeah, great question. So basically, if you think about playing poker, poker players have a rule of thumb when they talk about their poker games with other poker players, which is they'll describe the hand that they had presented to them, the options in front of them, but they won't actually say how the game turned out, like whether they won that hand or not. And that's because the only thing you have control over is the input. You control what you choose to do. You don't have control over the output of what happens. And a lot of times we could make the right choice, but have a bad outcome. Just like in poker, you can play poker perfectly and lose the hand, right? And that's why poker players will say, don't tell me how the hand turned out. That doesn't matter. All that matters is, given the information available, did you do the best job you could? It's also worth pointing out the world is way more complicated than poker. I mean, poker players make a lot of mistakes. If poker players make a lot of mistakes in that constrained environment of poker, surely we're going to make even more mistakes in the unconstrained environment of life. So it's natural to make mistakes doing decision making, and all we can do is just try to be right, somewhat more often. Thanks for the question.
Next up is Jim, James, and Cotton. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, so Spencer, this is really interesting. I really appreciate it. I've never seen the intrinsic values chart, and it's kind of a revelation when I started looking over that.
Oh, thanks.
But it made me wonder if there's more than just scanning through the words on that chart to identify intrinsic values, if there's some other criteria that might be useful. Some things popped out at me, but I started thinking, well, maybe there's kind of a scoring system where each word maybe has some questions behind it that could help me dig a little deeper on the things that I value. And then in turn, there's an implied step in the process of evaluating those intrinsic values against the decision. In other words, does your decision strengthen that value or allow you to pursue that value, or does it diminish your ability to pursue it? So I don't know if that was actually spelled out or not, but that's kind of my implication as I was looking at it.
I'm really glad you asked that question, because you may not realize this, but you can click on the chart and expand any part of it. And at the top of that page, there's a button to take our intrinsic values test, which Holly, who's on the call today, developed with me. And it will actually give you a test and help you discover your intrinsic values by asking you a huge number of questions and then give you a report at the end. So yes, exactly, to take the intrinsic values test. And you're totally also right that even if you know your values, you still have to do this process of like relating them to your goals and saying, like, given what I value, what should my goals be? Because it doesn't happen automatically. Like a lot of times our goals are things that we, remember from when we were young. Well, I really wanted to do this, or I really wanted to do that, or whatever. You have to rethink about them and say, now that I know more about my values, what do I really want to achieve?
Spencer, I have a proposal. There are lots of great questions. Let's take a little bit more question till about 2 o'clock, and we will drop the takeaway session and ask people to give their takeaways in the survey. That way we'll get best of both worlds. All right, next up is going to be James, Captain, Tom, and Francisca. James, go ahead.
Hi. So I understand, Mr. Greenberg, you were an entrepreneur and you're very good at communicating. So how do I communicate that I'm taking this decision so I can work harder on Sunday and Monday to my junior partner without demotivating him so that he doesn't want to work as much today?
Are you saying how, I didn't quite understand your question. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit?
I'm working on this business and I have 2 other people working with me, but they're not employees. They're also invested in the project. So I've finished something for myself today so I can focus more on the project tomorrow and the day after. How do I, but if I just leave, the other person will think, oh, he's being lazy. Maybe this project isn't as important to him as he really thinks.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So basically, something that happens a lot in decision making is that other people have a stake in our decision, right? Like they're affected by it, or they have an opinion about it. You know, it often comes up when we're young. Our parents might care about our decisions, right? Or our partner might care, about our decisions, or it might affect our children. So that's a really key element, is to, first of all, you might want to gather information from other stakeholders about how they feel about the decision. So at the very least, they know you're taking into account how your decision affects them. But in this case, let's say you're in a situation where you're the manager, you're the boss, and you have to make a decision, and it might have negative effects on your team, or they may at least perceive it that way. Then I think it can really help to communicate to them why you're making it, right? If they just see you make the decision unilaterally and say, hey, this caused problems for us, what a jerk, that can be a lot worse than if you say to them, hey, I had to make this decision, here's why I made it, here are the considerations, I took into account how it's going to affect you, and here's why I did it. And I think generally speaking, people will respond much better in those cases.
Next up is Cotton. Cotton, go ahead.
Hi. First of all, I didn't get to finish the intrinsic value, because maybe that result would help my questions here. But my question is about conflicts in decision making. When you know that, let's say you explored too many options, but the thing that you want to do may not be what your loved ones wants to do. Like, for example, you want to go this path where you can grow and but staying put is better for the other person. Does that fall into like mistake number 9 or something? You just do it and live with it?
Well, that's a really great question. And I think when we bind ourselves to someone, through marriage or by having a child, or even having a pet or anything like that, their sort of utility, if you will, becomes part of our utility, right? So we're kind of making a pact with them and saying, you know what, I'm not just going to look out for myself, I'm also going to look out for you. And those can be tricky situations to navigate when our interests come out of line with theirs. But really what I would say is fundamentally what you're talking about more is a negotiation. And when you think about negotiation, people often think of it as a very adversarial, like I'm just trying to get more of the benefit at the expense of the other person. But I think the better way to think about a negotiation is very often there are many things at play, and you may care about X more, whereas the other person cares about Y more, right? So let's say something's really important to you, but it's actually bad for your partner. Your partner doesn't want you to do it. Well, maybe you could say to your partner, here's this thing that I really want. Here's why I care about it. Let's find a way that you can be happy with it too. Whether that's maybe I can put time into do something you really want to do that I wouldn't normally do, or we can find some other way to cooperate where we both are happy with the final arrangement, not just feeling like the other person unilaterally made the decision.
Next up is going to be Tom, followed by Francisca. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question's about the fear part. I think that often, especially in something like career decisions, it's difficult to distinguish between what is I am just afraid of this and I will get used to it, versus like this is a real psychological difficulty that I might run into. For example, if I'm deciding whether I want to start a company and become an entrepreneur, then I might be afraid that the financial difficulty or like the financial uncertainty is going to weigh pretty heavy. Right. And I've in the past also made the mistakes of assuming that I will just get used to it, and that just not being the case. And it's very difficult to estimate like which kind of psychological factors you can influence and which ones are much harder to influence. Is there some way to navigate that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because one way to think about anxiety is that it's sort of like a smoke alarm for danger, right? So, if you're walking in the forest and a tiger jumps out, you're probably going to be pretty freaking anxious. You probably will actually be afraid. And that makes perfect sense, because a tiger could potentially hurt you, right? So when you think of anxiety as a smoke alarm for danger, then you can also start to think about the fact that sometimes smoke alarms can malfunction. And for people that are persistently anxious, who have high anxiety a lot of the time, one of two things is true. Either they're living in an extremely dangerous environment, like a war zone or an abusive relationship, in which case the best thing they can do is try to get out of that dangerous situation, get out of the war zone, get out of of the abusive relationship. Not always possible, but that's the best thing to do. The second possibility is that their smoke alarm is malfunctioning. And very often we see that in the world today, where people basically have malfunctioning smoke alarms, where they see danger everywhere. Their brain is constantly in a state of anxiety, but there's not that much danger, right? And so in those situations, that's where I go back to saying getting treatment for your anxiety is the best thing you can do in those situations. Either going to a therapist who is using an evidence-based method, or if not, reading a book or trying an app like our app Mindies for that. So I think that's really the best thing. But danger is real. If you start a startup and you invest a bunch of your money into it, there is a very significant chance that startup will fail, right? And you have to be prepared for that. That is a real danger. That's not an irrational fear, right? So I think the key thing is really thinking about, is my smoke alarm broken? Am I seeing danger everywhere, even though most of it is not real? In which case I really should work on my anxiety and get treatment. Or is this a valid danger, in which case it makes sense that I'm anxious about it, and now I just need to really consider, is it worth taking that risk? Also oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, before we jump into the next question, I just wanted to let everyone know that we have an email list where you can get reminders about our future events we're doing. So I'm just gonna put that in the chat. If you wanna be reminded about our future events, just go to this link and sign up. Yeah.
All right, let's do one thing, Spencer. Let's do the breakout rooms now, because I want to make sure that we have some time, some buffer of time afterwards. So folks, you want to give people instructions about what to do in the breakout rooms?
Yep. So you're about to be put into small little groups, breakout rooms. Oh, what are we doing? 12 minutes, 15 minutes? How long?
We're doing 15 minutes.
Okay, 15 minutes with about 6 people, you said?
6 people, yeah.
Okay, so you have 15 minutes with about 6 people. And the exercise I'd like you to do as a small group is the following. I want you to, if you're comfortable, you don't have to talk in the group if you don't want, but if you're comfortable speaking in the group, I'd like you to share a decision that you made in the past, just briefly talk about it, that didn't go well, and see if you can explain to some extent what you did wrong or what you could have learned that could help you in your future decision making. So again, I'll just say it again. So you're gonna go around, and if you're willing to speak, you're gonna share a past decision that didn't go well, briefly, and then you're going to talk about what you think you could have done better for future decisions, or what you could learn from it to help your future decisions go better. And please make sure everyone has the time to speak if they want, because it's very easy for the time to blow by really quickly. So just make sure everyone gets a share.
All right, folks. So you're going to automatically get moved into a room with 6 people, 6 to 7 people, and then at the end of 15 minutes, you will be automatically moved back into this room. For any reason, if you don't like the breakout room, you can just click on leave the breakout room and you'll come back to the main room where I am. All right, so I'm starting the breakout rooms now. We got about 10 minutes to wrap up, and then we will do the social version of the breakout rooms.
Perfect. Sounds great. So I just wanted to finish up saying a few things, and then I'm going to give you a quick feedback survey that you can help us make these events better in the future, because this is just an experiment and we really want to figure out how to make great events for you all. So your feedback would be really appreciated. But just to wrap up, I just want to remind you some of the things we discussed today. That basically when you're making a decision, there's 9 major things that we talked about, and I'll just recap them really quickly. The first is that it's really important to know what you're trying to achieve with the decision. So when you go into the decision, think about, what are my goals here? What do I actually want out of this? The second is that in knowing what goals you're trying to achieve, it's very useful to know what values you actually have. And so there you can think about taking our intrinsic values test on clearthinking.org, or looking at that chart that I shared in the chat window. The third is beware of narrow framing, where we think of ourselves as just making a narrow decision between, let's say, option A and option B. Very often, there are actually other options that we may not have considered. And as our study suggested, people often actually can find a better option than any of the ones that they've considered if they take the time to brainstorm. The fourth thing is that we should try to make more decisions. Often we're just, staying on the same path, putting one foot in front of the other, and aren't even thinking about the fact that we actually, by not deciding, we're effectively deciding. By doing the same thing, we're effectively choosing the default decision. But often we could add more decisions to our life that might benefit us, and we can find what these extra decisions by thinking about what problems we're experiencing, and what kind of decisions we might make around them. The fifth common mistake I see is that people don't do enough research. If they're making a big life decision, it's really important to think about, well, what we're going to go learn about this outcome or what this thing would be like. You know, can I find information about this career? Can I find information about the what it's like to live in the city, and so on. Number 6 relates to that, which is that we often don't leverage people that we know or that we could know. So think about who's already been down this path, who's made this decision before, and can I talk to them? Can I talk to people who I think are good decision makers and see what they have to say? But remember that they can't make the decision for you. You still have to make the decision, but they can help guide you in the way. 7th, beware of the sunk cost fallacy. Remember, the sunk cost fallacy is when we take into account the fact that we've already put a lot of time, effort, money into this particular path, and we think, oh, I don't want to leave this path because I'll have wasted all of that effort. But the fact is that any effort or money or time in the past is already gone. It's gone whether you stick with this path or not. So you should only be thinking about the future prospects. And if you're interested in that topic, we have a whole module on clearthinking.org about the sunk cost fallacy. 8th, remember that anxiety often holds people back from making good decisions. If you have substantial anxiety and you think your fire alarm is kind of going off, even though there's not a lot of danger, I highly recommend seeking treatment for that. It is something that's treatable. I'm someone that generally has high anxiety, and I've sought treatment and found it really useful. So I highly recommend that. But on the other hand, even if you don't have high anxiety, oftentimes we'll take the choice that avoids short-term pain, but avoiding short-term pain can cause a lot more long-term pain. Sometimes, you know, you have to just rip off the Band-Aid and you're really better off because of it. That brings us to number 9. Remember that we tend to sometimes think that a decision is, you know, the end of our life. It's the most important thing. But the reality is you're going to make a lot of other decisions in the future. A lot of times you can reverse the decision later. And just generally speaking, we tend to overestimate the impact that things will have in our life. This idea of affective forecasting, where we tend to think, oh, I'm going to be miserable if I don't have this, or I'm going to be super happy if I have that. In reality, the impacts on our well-being are less than we think they're going to be. So those are the things that I want you to just remember. And I'm going to give you a link right now. I'd really appreciate it if you just take like 3 minutes right now to go give us feedback, tell us how to make these events better. We want you to be brutally honest. We don't want you to tell us that, you know, we're doing great. We want you to tell us how to make this better. So I just put in the chat, please go to the feedback form. It'll just take you like 3 or 4 minutes. Someone asked whether today's presentation is recorded. Yes, it is recorded. We'll put it up somewhere, probably maybe on clearthink.org, the blog, and Shrikant is going to put it up. Just to remind you, this is in collaboration with the 52 Living Ideas. Shrikant, do you want to say something quick about that?
Yes, so we do meetups every day on philosophy, psychology, and self-improvement. It's at 9 p.m. Eastern time on the weekdays and 2:30 p.m. Eastern time on the weekends. I'm going to put a link again to the meetups, so you can just join and you'll be able to find out about all the meetups that are coming up. And I just want to tell you there is a meetup starting at 2:30. So we'll be doing social breakout rooms now. And then there will be a meetup going on Stoicism. So if you're interested in Stoicism, the author Greg Lopez, who actually works with clear thinking too on different projects, is going to be here talking about his book. So you're welcome to stay. So thank you very much. Over to you, Spencer.
Great, thank you. And someone asked, is it useful to get feedback even if you're a longtime clear thinking user? Absolutely. Please fill out the feedback form, whether you've never heard of clear thinking or whether you've been using it for a long time. It'd be super useful, and we're going to take your feedback into account in designing the future events. So just give you 2 minutes to fill that out, and then we're going to have some socializing time where Shrikant's going to put you into how many people will be per group, Shrikant?
Let me see. How about close to, because I don't know how many people are going to leave. So it's going to end up being about 4 people per groups.
Okay.
Per group.
You'll just be able to socialize with some of the other people here. Just for fun, you can talk about what we talked about today, or you can just, get to know people. But we're going to do 2 rounds of that?
Just 1 round, because we
one round. Okay.
late.
So you'll get 1 round of getting to chat with people. So just stay here for 2 minutes while people fill out the feedback form, and then we'll do some socializing.
Yes, the socializing round will be about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'll keep them open for 20 minutes.
Great. So you'll just be able to chat for about 20 minutes with 4 other people who are attending. Just one thing while you're chatting in small groups, I think a really common thing is that sometimes people who maybe are a little more introverted, a little more shy, will not get a chance to introduce themselves and just will sit there the whole time. So, please try to include everyone. And, if someone's not talking, just, introduce yourself and, there'll be more fun for everyone.
All right, Spencer, shall we?
Yeah. If you haven't had a chance to finish the feedback form, please just, quickly submit it, even if you haven't been able to write everything. It looks like 42 of you or 44 of you already submitted. Thank you so much for doing that. Your feedback is just going to be so useful. You can also finish it afterwards if you want. But yeah, so Shrikant's going to put you into little groups. You're going to get to know some other people who are here. I hope you have fun, and thank you all for coming. This was really fun for us. And we have remember, we have 2 more events planned. So 2 of these experiments, these are to figure out if we want to keep doing this long term. So would love to have you come back. I just put again the little reminder mailing list if you want to get reminders about future events, and hope to see you at one of the future ones. Thanks
Wonderful.
Again.
So I'm starting the breakout rooms now. If you're here for the Stoic meetup and you get transported into a breakout room, so you can just leave the breakout room and come back into the main room. And for those who are here, who are not here for Stoicism, if you're curious about Stoicism, you're welcome to leave and come back into this this main room. We will start the Stoic meetup at around 2:32 over here. I'm starting the breakout rooms now.